Hello, welcome to this webinar. I want to thank the Chamber for the opportunity to talk to you all today and to present this information. My name is John Heltzel. I'm the Director for Resilience Planning for the Electric Infrastructure Security Council, and this webinar is going to talk about preparedness, resilience, and the EarthX opportunity. And the EarthX opportunity is one that I hope you'll take us up on. It's a free opportunity. So if we think about the world as it exists and the things that we depend on, and you go back to the beginning of time, I love this picture because this is what the night sky used to look like. A mass of stars, the galaxy was there, the Milky Way was there. And the reason we could see that at that point was because there was no electricity. Basically, this is the beginning of the black sky event. So when I talk about black sky, I want you to think of this picture and that there is no electricity. And I'll mention black sky several times as we go through this, because our purpose at the Electric Infrastructure Security Council is to help communities, individuals, and organizations prepare for a long duration power outage, something that we need to be ready for. The other thing, though, that we want to talk a little bit about today is tie this into the theme of the overall workshop that the Chamber is sponsoring. And let's talk about some of the lessons that we've learned so far from COVID. Unfortunately, I have to say some of these are only lessons observed, because I'm not sure we've actually learned the lesson yet. But one of the first ones right off the bat is supply chain is king. If you don't control your supply chain, you're at the mercy of other forces. And that's something, as someone interested in preparedness and resilience, we'll all begin taking a hard look at the supply chain going forward. Second bullet on here talks about communications is critical, and not just communications. There's more information available today than ever before in the history of mankind. But what we really need is information through a form of some type of communications from someone who is an absolute authority, someone who can help inform our decision making, someone that can help us see the correct path, someone that's a truth teller. So that's incredibly important to keep in the back of your mind. And we've learned that through COVID. The third bullet there talks about leadership. We're very fortunate. We're working with the Australian Risk Policy Institute on some new risk procedures. But the one thing that we're in total agreement on is that we're going to need a new form of leadership going forward. We need leadership that understands the information processing requirements and demands and how to coalesce information to make better decisions faster so that we can save lives and protect property. And then one of the biggest lessons we've seen come out of COVID is this idea of plans, but not just having a plan, but that your plan is integrated with other sectors. So cross-sector planning needs to become a watchword for all of us working in preparedness and emergency management. And at the corporate level, this is critical because very few corporations control all aspects of their resource chain. So cross-sector planning is something we need to pay attention to. And then the other thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit, for the first time in the world, we are at a level of interconnectedness and interdependency we've never thought of before. If you go back 100 years ago, most people couldn't make it if they lost power. Today, the loss of power basically means the end of most of the systems that underpin modern society. Highly interconnected, interdependent. And then finally, something that COVID has taught us, leaning somewhat back towards the supply chain, is this idea that we've chased since really the dawn of the IT age, or the computer age, if you want to think of it that way, or the internet age, and that is efficiency at a cost. We've made our systems so efficiency driving costs down that we've made them extremely brittle. And now we have to begin the process of thinking our way out of how do we move back from that level of efficiency, maintaining an eye on cost, but expand into resilience. And it's going to basically mean a redesign, some new analysis and some new capabilities along the supply chain to ensure that we are as resilient as we will need to be going forward. And then the last thing on this slide, I hate to say it, I know a lot of people think COVID is the end of the world, but the truth is COVID is really, really bad, but it's not as bad as it can get. A number of communities around the world have had a multi-day power outage in the last 4 months. Now think if they had a multi-week power outage or a multi-month power outage on top of having COVID. Almost unthinkable. But the reality is, within our tightly interconnected world, with all the dependencies we have, that truly would be a very, very bad picture. So one of the things that we spend a lot of time with at the council is actually thinking about how are these systems all interconnected And the concept has come to the forefront of this thing called the metagrid. So if you look at the diagram on the right, it looks like a series of dots inside a box. If you consider that each one of those dots is a portion of its own unique grid, but then realize that every one of those dots is interconnected to the other dots, you get a feel about what this is about. So the metagrid is a grid of grids: the electric grid, the water grid, the communications grid, the transportation grid. You start to get an idea as I roll those things off. So many grids, so interconnected. Today's interdependent sectors are totally linked together for supply and services, and they're growing faster and faster and becoming more complex and at a level of hyperconnectivity that we've just never thought about before. Literally, a change in the supply chain in Hong Kong will ripple across the world in a matter of days. So we've got these critical systemic gaps that we need to begin to build new tools. And these new tools need to self-evolve, and then they need to grow with the grid. This is a new concept. It is something that we've never really thought about before, but if you think of it from a business model, this is how we need it to come forward, because only through the business model will we be able to afford to design and build these new tools. So to be effective, these tools are going to have to become profitable business tools. And the council's not in the mode of building these tools. What we like to do is facilitate the discussion among the business owners to talk about how we can support them. So for those of you all that might be new to this idea of a black sky event, I want to spend just a second talking about cascading consequences. This particular graph came out of a special study done for the government. What it tries to illustrate, and I think it does a pretty good job, is that if you interrupt any one of these platforms, banking, finance, water, communications, oil and gas, or fuel, the power plant for the electric sector that actually drives the electricity, our transportation networks, one we all know about is the traffic light, but when you think about the transportation network, think about air trans, think about sea trans, think about rail trans. Then we've got the emergency services, which are critical to our communities. And then ultimately, we've got the government that overlays over top of all this. If you interrupt any one of these major interconnections, either through the water system going down or the food distribution going down, which we've seen indications of in the last several months because of COVID, impacts from the COVID virus, issues we need to deal with. And then obviously healthcare in today's time, nothing more important. Fuel production and distribution. A lot of people think that if the electric grid goes out, we'll always have plenty of fuel. Unfortunately, that's not the case today. Most of the electric grid in the US now is running off natural gas. And as the trend continues, it won't be very long before natural gas will make up the bulk of how we produce energy. But natural gas requires electricity to move through the pipelines. So if we lose electricity, it's a double whammy. And then communications, obviously, to restore any system, we're going to have a form of communications that will become survivable. Transportation, manufacturing, all the things we think of as modern business, they're all interconnected. And if we lose electricity, they'll all be impacted. So when we talk about the metagrid, what we ought to think about from a business standpoint is these bullets that are on this slide. And I'm not going to read the slides to you all. We will make sure at the end of the presentation that you've got the ability to get the slides. But I want to call out a couple just in the interest of time. To become really resilient, we need to happen to the metagrid what happened to the internet. And I've been around for a long time. I've actually worked in computer systems for the bulk of my adult life. And I remember the advent of the internet when it was kind of a fledgling thing that really only let us do email, and you had to have a dial-up account to get on. When it started to change was when business decided to start using the internet for commerce. And I would expect people attending a Chamber of Commerce webinar to understand that. For the metagrid to become more resilient, it needs to have a private sector focus and the investment from the private sector to make sure that we are protecting all the elements of the grids. It needs to have a self-evolving security mechanism. As you know, cybersecurity is one of the biggest threats we face today. And then it's going to need to continue to evolve. So it can't be one thing in a box. It's going to be several things in different boxes in different configuration, all of them put together with an intelligent network design so that we can leverage the synergy of all our requirements to minimize the cost to make it affordable. And it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it is going to happen. But what we need to be concerned with is how quickly is it going to happen. So we started this with talking about preparedness and resilience. And again, I just want to hit a few points. You'll have the slides if you want them. But if you want to think about preparedness, there's some constructs that may help you. You'll see on the slide, it talks about an emergency response plan and a crisis management plan and a business continuity plan. I hope you all have those. If you don't, that ought to be something you take down as a note and figure out how to get those for your organization. But from a preparedness standpoint, we want to think about how do we protect, how do we prevent, mitigate if we can. We need to think about the level of complexity and the interdependencies that our organizations operate within. And then who are our stakeholders? Early on, when I conducted a lot of seminars, I'd ask stakeholder questions and I'd find out it's one customer group and it's the people in the organization, but that's not true anymore. Your stakeholder group is broad. It's the community that you work in. It's your vendor community that supports you. It could be that it's the vendor community that you're a part of that you support. So your stakeholders are vast and wide, but one that you need to make sure that you keep in the back of your mind, your stakeholders are definitely your critical lifeline utilities, because without those critical lifeline utilities being prepared, you're at their lowest level of preparedness. Just something to think about. So preparedness has a lot of different elements to it. And so does resilience. I actually got a chance, I was part of a funded DHS study about 4 years ago, and we really got to spend a lot of time pulling down into resilience. And if you want to go read definitions of resilience, you can read all day long and you'll never get tired because, well, you'll get bored, but you'll never get tired of finding another definition of resilience. You can see the one from PPD 21 up there. I'm not going to read it to you, but here's the one that I like. I'm a good old boy from Kentucky, spent a lot of time in the military, and I had to make this simple for myself. The bottom line for resilience is these 3 points. First, don't get hit. If you can avoid whatever the situation is going to be, if you can see it coming, if you can mitigate against it, if you can take steps to ensure that you're not a victim, that's the best thing you can possibly do. So first thing is don't get hit if you want to be resilient. But unfortunately, there are things like COVID that maybe you just can't stop. Have a plan that if you do get hit, you are going to bounce back. You know that you've got the things already pre-coordinated, your resource supplies are identified, your manpower is identified, your workforce is identified, your safety and security issues are solved. And the third one is bounce back better. I love that little graphic at the top that I found there. Bounce back better. What does that mean? It means when you go down and you come back up, have a plan to use the energy that you put into this motion to come back to actually improve your environment, your operations, your investments in your employees. All those things should be considered. So here's John's definition for resilience. Don't get hit if you don't have to. If you get hit, you can't not be hit. Make sure you've got a plan to come back. And your plan to come back needs to leave you in a better situation than it found you. And one of the things I would encourage you to think about is when you're coming back and you're going to be better, reach out to your community and find out how do you plug into their plan or how do you help them plug into your plan. So a few points on this for resilience considerations, just a couple of things I'll talk about. I mentioned leadership earlier. I've done a number of interesting studies, and almost without fail, the corporations and the communities that have bounced back better have had strong leadership. And that doesn't mean that they had somebody that understood everything and drove the process forward. Mostly it meant that they had involved leadership that took the time to understand the requirements and then align the right teams and capabilities to do that. And to do that, it's a matter of thinking through a number of these issues that are on this bullet list here. Some of the ones that I personally think are pretty important. Obviously, I would highlight the one at the bottom of communications. Every corporation, every organization I've done business with for the last 5 or 6 years, going around the world leading Black Sky webinars and planning events, I always ask them, do you have an emergency communications package? And they all say yes. And then what I normally do is make them mad. And I go, okay, is your emergency communications package survivable? And they ask me, well, what do you mean? I said, well, when the power's out, will yours work? Well, some say yes, most say no. And I said, well, if you've got power to yours, will it still be able to connect up if other people don't have a connection? And a lot of times the answer is no, I hadn't thought of that. There are very few systems that are truly survivable emergency communications. And if you're interested more about that, feel free to send me an email. I'll get you in contact with people that have solutions for those problems. but definitely leadership and communications along with the other issues are special resilience considerations for us. And the last one down there, you see the little carrot man jumping up to get the carrot. Some of these things have to be incentivized. And sometimes the corporation has to incentivize it. And sometimes the corporation has to ask the regulatory environment to incentivize resilience. Just things to think about. This particular matrix is kind of interesting. I'm going to only give you the high points on it. If you look across the top, we've got the 6 interconnected circles there. Those are what we call the 6 major black sky threats, things that we know can bring the grid down or bring down parts of the infrastructure. You can see those. 3 of them are man-made and 3 of those are naturally occurring, but they occur regularly, all of them. You'll notice on the left, we've got the impact for critical sectors, and you'll notice that in there is manufacturing and emergency services in most of the major sectors that support modern society. Where we want to spend our time talking about, though, is in resilience and preparedness. So preparedness can be incorporated into these 4 bullets of planning, training, exercising, and equipping. And if we do that right, if we do all 4 of these right, we end up building dependencies and coordination that work together in a cross-sector manner, and we actually, as a society, become more resilient. So that's what this matrix is all about. So I want to take you back and I want to look at my beautiful black sky slide here. Let me ask you a question, very simply. A year ago, if I told you that you could have a crystal ball and when you looked in it, it would let you see everything that was going to happen in 2020 with COVID, would you have been interested in that? Would that have been something that would have got your attention? Would you make time to look at that crystal ball? Think about it, would you? I think most people would. And what we're offering today to talk, when we're going to talk about it, is EarthX. EarthX is the ability to take a look at your operations, your policies, your procedures, your teams, your interrelationships, your cross-sector planning, and spend a few hours actually thinking about, are we ready for events like this? Now, I will tell you that EarthX is a very serious exercise, but it's also a whole bunch of fun. It's free, so the cost is right. It's cross-sector, so it's going to be broad enough that you can actually see what's happening in multiple lanes. It's all online, so as my exercise team member tells me, he says, we should do well because we're going to be the safest exercise anybody can participate in this year. You do not have to sit at a table side by side. It is online. You actually get a chance to schedule it whenever you want to schedule it. It'll be available for a 2-month period, and you pick the date and time that you want to play. So it is on demand, and you can play it multiple times if you want to. And probably one of the best things about it is open for play for literally everyone on the planet. Last year, we had play in 41 countries. We had over 1,200 organizations and individuals register, we had 3,200 organizations and individuals with 12,000 people playing throughout the multi-month period. So it's a great opportunity. And the better way to think about it is not as an exercise, but it's a crystal ball. And you'll find out that we put a lot of time and effort into it, and it's pretty engaging. You will not be bored if you sign up. So EarthX this year, I'm going to really talk about the exercise now and try to make some points with you that have to do with your own professional preparedness and resilience activities. It'll be available from 1 September through 31 October. And this year's theme is called What If? What if these events actually happen? What would happen to our world as we know it? Again, think if we had done this last year for COVID, how much better off we would have been prepared. So a few things about EarthX as a concept. It is a come as you are opportunity. There are a number of exercises very large in nature that are available for different sectors to play, but a lot of times they require you to put in months of lead up work. You need to conduct workshops and seminars and pull some information together. EarthX is different. You get your team together, you come in, you boot up the actual exercise and you play it as you are. If you want to prepare, you can. It is widely distributed. We've got a special tool that we're working with that basically pushes the exercise around the world. And we've got a lot of different players as you'll see. And then we do support primarily in-depth discussion. So we've got many people that will come in and use the EarthX to actually pull their team together or their teams together and have in-depth discussions about what do these situations mean to me, my family, my organization, my community. Some of the things I pulled out for the business community, knowing that this is primarily who we'd have today, the idea to test policies, the idea to take a hard look at your own practical cybersecurity solutions, the idea that you'll get a chance to evaluate your risks and assess what measures you could put into place. What are the questions you need to ask to your stakeholders? Are there things that you need to think about changing or asking for a change in a standard or a regulation? One of the better groups we've been working with for the last 4 years is actually NARUC, who is the group that represents the regulatory commissioners across the US. We did a very similar briefing for them a few weeks ago, and I got a lot of great feedback, but they're listening. They want feedback from you all. And then, other things that you can think about is you may have to put together a response and a restoration mission. Would it not be better to do that before the event happened? Obviously it would. And then of course, the standard emergency management areas of preparedness, mitigation, and response, recovery. But we add a separate dimension of this, which is actually the restoration effort. And restoration is an emerging theme that we've learned lessons from Hurricane Maria and Puerto Rico and some of the other states that have had their infrastructure badly damaged, and it took weeks to months to years to put back. And then finally, you get a chance to pull together a team that maybe is a little bit different than your normal team. And we recommend you do that. We highly encourage it. Bring in other stakeholders as you play your exercise. So some of our assumptions, just in case you're wondering, everything you need to play EarthX is provided to you. We'll actually provide some a handbook, a workbook, a facilitator's guide, and all the information you need will come through the actual online exercise in addition to the workbook. So you do have to have access to the internet. You can bring your own policies and procedures. We recommend that. We never ask about that, but it would probably help if you had them somewhere close by. But the one thing that I recommend strongly to everybody is you should have at least one person who's going to serve as a facilitator or a recorder, because lessons learned over the last 3 years of EarthX, the ideas and the discussion flows fast and furious. And to have somebody that can kind of ride herd on the discussion is obviously a great idea. I personally recommend having 2 facilitators and 2 recorders. That's totally up to you, depending on how many people you want to have play the game. And then there is no assessment for EarthX. It's perfectly situated and developed to support an assessment. But if you need an assessment for your organization, which many do, just take care of that assessment on your own. What we do is we publish a report called the Roadmap, and this one will be called the Roadmap to 2021. And we will talk about the lessons observed from all the feedback we get from you all for EarthX 2020. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual exercise and hopefully pique your curiosity about what this could be and what it means for you. I've been in the security business since I was a junior officer in the Army. One of the things that I would tell you now, and I tell all my friends and most of my associates, is this threat that we're talking about today for this year, this threat is real and this threat is now. I just completed a cyber security awareness webinar before I jumped on this. And I believe that people are starting to get the word, but the number of ways we can be attacked through cyber is jaw-dropping. It's not a matter of doing one thing right, it's a matter of doing many things right and being prepared on multiple levels. The other thing is, and you may not be aware of this, but the electromagnetic pulse threat is real. It's out there today. And with the level of conflict around the world, the idea that there might be a foreign adversary who wants to bring down our way of life and has access to low-yield nuclear weapons. It doesn't take a big bomb. It just takes getting a low-yield weapon about 22 kilometers into space, and that's not very high, to disrupt the grid. So the threat is real and the threat is now, and I think we're going to present some amazing material to you through video if you register to play. So one of the things we've highlighted here in the last couple of months in the webinars we've been completing is this idea of responsibility. And the one thing I would say as an older member of this community, if you have to ask the question, who's responsible? The answer is you're responsible. You're personally responsible for your own security. You're personally responsible for the security of your family, in your community, and definitely your business. Because I will tell you, it's not a question of if these things are going to happen, but when. And if you peel back what's going on with cyber, They're happening today as we speak. Someone is under attack right now. The problem is we've become kind of numb to it, and it's not being covered like it ought to be, in my opinion. So when you get into EarthX and you register, there's some great things that you get to take advantage of. We've continually modified our process for bringing people into the exercise. Last year, we had 38 different lanes of play. This year, to make things better for us and better for you all, we've grouped them into 7 functional areas. And this year, we've made a change that you can play multiple functional areas. So depending on your level of interest, you might be interested in private sector and financial functions, but you go, you know, I'm kind of interested also what on the leaders and communities needs to be thinking about, because I live in a house in a neighborhood. The one that I have the star over there is the one that I wish everybody in the world would take advantage of and sign up and play, and that's individuals and families. Everybody literally needs to go in and play this exercise to know how to protect your family and yourself against these threats. What you need to do at home for your home, your house, your family is different than what your business sector needs to be concerned with. So I'd say there's plenty of room out there. Feel free to register for one or more, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can do that. But definitely individuals and family is well worth registration and taking a little time because remember, you're responsible. So this slide we've added because a lot of people go, well, how do we do it? I mean, how do we think about this exercise? How do we actually put it together? The first thing is go ahead and register so that you'll start getting information from us. It only takes a few seconds to register and then you'll be on our email list. Obviously, I've talked about individual and family preparedness, but as an organization, we've run into a couple of different things that we want to share. One is there's this idea of you can play the exercise as an organized group. And that basically means you get everybody together. If you're a business that is getting people together in boardrooms, I don't know to say shame on you or what are you thinking about, but I know some have to. I'm a member of a couple that absolutely have to. But if you are doing that, bring your team together in the boardroom or bring your team together in the EOC or the operations center and conduct it as a group. Probably a smarter play though is to use some web technology, run the exercise and then conduct group discussions. One of the coolest things I saw last year was two things, was a decentralized approach, which in California on the West Coast, this group put it together and ran it as a headquarters element, but then they had 12 different regions across the state. They had each region play, and then they had arranged times to join together in a video conference and to discuss their answers and what they saw. And it was really interesting because different locations picked up on different cues. The other one that is kind of neat was is a national organization with members in all the states. And they did a very similar structure. Everyone registered to play the exercise individually, signing up for the same lane. But then they set a webinar time frame so that you played your piece and then you could join in on the webinar. And they ended up conducting a national after action review. Really, really great idea. The other ideas that came out of last year's after action report or the surveys that we get back talked about running it for different operational groups, different resource groups, and others. So you have the ability to register EarthX and then play it multiple times within your organization. And then the last bullet there was something I thought was just genius. This organization registered for the EarthX exercise, and then they played A team, B team. So their A team was the guys that sit in the chairs as the primary. They played the exercise, recorded their results. Then they switched out, replayed the exercise with the B team, and they let the A team critique the B team. But the interesting information we got back was both teams learned from each other. The cool thing again about EarthX is it's free, and this year we're supporting the ability to play multiple times. What you see on the screen now is a number of webinars we've been conducting as lead-up events for EarthX. The ones that are lined through, and again, you're going to get these slides, so don't worry about trying to write it down. But the ones that are lined through are the ones that we've already conducted. Up to today, we just did the today's cyber threat, cascading consequences in inactive defense. We'll have about 4 more of these, especially a couple on how to facilitate EarthX, and then a kickoff webinar, which is going to be very much like a news event. So if it's not too late to register, once you register, you can get access to the video wall. Go look at the ones you missed if you're interested, or jump on now and pick it up with the facilitation webinars and just become part of the team. Again, all these events are free this year, one more time. A couple of important dates, though, are these webinar dates that are on this screen. We will be training facilitators. It's not mandatory that your facilitator attend this training. Nothing is mandatory other than registering. But we have gotten some incredible feedback from facilitators over the last 3 years that getting a little glimpse of how the exercise is going to unfold really helped them prepare their organization. So we're learning from that, and we want you to do that. We will record these, they'll go up on the video wall. So the first one there that's next week on the 23rd of July will be kind of an introduction to the exercise and things to think about from a facilitator standpoint. The one in August, though, is actually going to be a glimpse, kind of a glimpse under the hood, so to speak, of how to play at EarthX. And we will actually show the live screens that'll be part of the exercise once you log on for your exercise. Another thing that we're doing this year is we are putting together a very comprehensive workbook. We hope this workbook will be something that you keep because it's got a great set of background material in it. You don't need all that material to play EarthX. You can play EarthX straight up just as it comes off the screen. But a lot of people said, hey, we would like some help in some of these areas. So we're putting that information together. I don't think too many people will print it because it's going to be a pretty big electronic document, but there will be a small slimmed down version for participants. And then the facilitator's guide will actually just include critical notes that facilitators need to move forward. Both of those will be available on the 15th of August, and we will send them out to everyone who registers. And then the last bullet on this slide talks about some pre-play material that we'll be sending out kind of to build suspense for the kickoff of EarthX. We will help you see all the bad things that are going on in the world that maybe you missed. Some of our goals, we've talked about these, EMP and Cyber, obviously, since those are the events, but we're really focusing on continuity plans and contingency plans and giving you a chance to take a look at your own. And I've had a chance to advise a number of organizations, both private sector and public sector, and there's no shame in admitting that maybe these plans aren't as good as you need them to be. The only shame is if you don't take this opportunity to jump in and find out where you need to make those improvements. And then the last thing there is this idea of a global continuity structure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. This is basically a webinar for a group of business players that are interested in resilience. These are the 4 resilience bullets that EarthX is going to support. We think that, you know, the lowest hanging fruit in the resilience portfolio that you can pursue that you don't have to spend a lot of money on is this idea of improving your plans, improving your cross-sector relationships. Those don't cost a lot of money. And if you need a jump start, EarthX you can't beat the price, let me put it that way. But I think by plugging into these communities that we're bringing together, you might find that you've got a lot of other areas that you might want to get involved with or potential partners you might want to reach out to. So the actual exercise itself, kind of in one slide, it is facilitated with state-of-the-art video injects. Kind of cool thing that happened this year. We were the last film shoot allowed to happen in Hollywood, California. Our team got in on the last day before they locked everybody down. So our videos were all shot in California. They're mastered and they are engaging. If you talk to anybody who's played EarthX before, they will tell you the videos are just amazing. They really engage you and pull you in. You're going to get a workbook, you're going to get the guide. Probably the most important thing on this slide, though, is to begin to think in your mind, well, how does the exercise fit together? When you launch your link to EarthX, you're going to start at the top of the Battle Rhythm Manager, which is a tool that we've got, and you will move through phase 1, consuming both the videos and the inject information that'll come through the application, and then there'll be a video that closes out that phase. You'll move through phase 1 to phase 2, slight change in perspective, new adventure with Cyber, and it'll basically conclude with a video as well. And then the third phase is something that's very unique to us. I think we're actually taking advantage of what's happening worldwide with COVID. We have offices all around the globe, and we want to give everybody a chance to have input into what are the things that impacted me, what are the things that impacted my organization, and what are the absolute priorities that we've got to address to make sure we're not caught short again. So by signing up, you'll get a chance to be part of that discussion, and then you'll also get input and feedback from our lessons learned process, which again is the roadmap to 2021. So for those of you all that are graphically oriented, and I am, This is literally how the information flows. So when you register for EarthX, you'll get a return email that says, congratulations, you registered, and here is your link for the exercise. That link will not work until 1 September. We're constantly answering emails from people who said, I fired off my link and it didn't work. They won't work until 1 September, so just remember that. When you fire it off after 1 September, and actually it'll be 1 September in Australia, something that we learned, it turns the next day out there a lot earlier than it does here in the US. That'll bring you in right at the top of the Battle Rhythm Manager, and the first thing you'll do is you'll take the opening video, and then as you move through this, we try to reinforce critical emergency management principles to teach people how to attack a disaster. So you'll follow through establishing situational awareness, you'll do a low-level risk assessment, you'll develop your courses of action, then you ultimately end up having to make a decision. What is it that you're going to do? When you get to that piece, you'll go into a new video, which is going to advance the scenario, much like the real world. You'll know what you know, but you don't know everything. And what happens after the advancing scenario is a really cool thing that we're bringing to the exercise world this year, something that I've never seen before. We're actually building it from the council standpoint with our programming partners. You're going to get to enter into the Monte Carlo game. And when you enter into Monte Carlo, if you're familiar with that term, obviously there's Monte Carlo, the country where you can go and gamble. The Monte Carlo is a programming technique that randomizes the feedback that you get. And so you're going to get a chance to come into this with your decision and learn new things about the environment, learn new things about your sector. And then you'll get a chance to then use that information and create your final actions, put those into the system, and then you'll close out that phase with a video. So phase 1 and phase 2 follow these steps, very engaging. Your blood pressure will go up. And if you've got a good team, your dialogue discussion will be very engaging. Let's just say that. So as we talk about this, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but some people, some of these terms are not familiar with some groups. Establishing situational awareness really has to do with understanding what's going on in the world. If you think about COVID, let me paint this picture for you. How many people at the end of 2019 really knew much about what was going on with the little virus outbreak in China? It's not fair to say that no one did, because some people did. And then some people in January learned a little bit more because they were interested. But for a lot of people, it didn't strike them. They didn't get a good picture until the end of February, more than 60 days late. So one of the things we talk about in situational awareness is how do you put that together? Understanding with the 2 threats you're dealing with this year, these things could be happening anytime, anywhere. And how are you prepared? And then how are you going to harden and protect for some of the threats? And there are things you can do that don't cost a lot of money. You'll go in from that, you'll get into understanding risk. We can all do better at understanding risk and going through a process that's structured that'll help us really figure out what could get us. I encourage you to take a look at this link down at the bottom. A great partner of ours, ARPI, the Australian Risk Policy Institute. There's actually a webinar on our video wall that you might want to listen to, where Mr. Tony Charge, who leads that organization, paints this new picture about strategic risk policy. And it basically puts you in this thought process of better understanding your dependencies, your assumptions, your vulnerabilities, and your level of exposure. But then it comes back up to those 2 key concepts up there of a new form of leadership, and a leadership that's using qualitative metrics, not quantitative metrics. So many of our systems today are all quantitative, and you don't begin to learn anything until you hit a number. And unfortunately, the gap between when you hit that number and when you should have reacted is almost 0 these days. EarthX, again, gives you a chance to come up with an unlimited amount of time, multiple options for things you want to do. In the military, we call that developing courses of action. And then you actually get to put your team engaged into gear and try to figure out what decisions you're going to make. And there's a lot of different things to think about when you do that. But decision-making obviously is the key to moving forward. After you go through that decision-making process, though, then you're going to drop into this really cool part called Monte Carlo. And what will happen is, on the left-hand side of the screen, there will be a big button there where you'll get to push that button, someone on your team will, and the dice will roll or the wheel will spin, and you will get a new change in your environment. You'll get a new inject in exercise speak. You have to do that at least 3 times. You can do it as many as 10 times. I'm thinking about sending awards to people that are willing to do all 10. I will tell you, the situation gets worse. The more you spend, it becomes more and more real, but it's going to make you think through the changes that you need to be prepared for when you enter one of these disaster situations. And we are taking this from real world events where when we first experienced what happened in, let's use Maria, for example, and we thought, well, it's just a localized power outage. We quickly learned that it wasn't, it was island wide. But then the next thing that happened to us was the harbor shut down because there was no room in the harbor for more incoming materials. And one thing tripped to the next thing, which tripped to the next thing. So that's the idea behind Monte Carlo. It'll be very exciting to play that piece. A few things about decisions. Again, you'll get these slides, but part of what we want you to do is learn how to make decisions in this kind of environment. So if you play it for real, you'll get the sense that it's a real event that you're working with. But leaders today in our business world have to be able to make sense out of what's going on to better protect the business investment. They've got to be able to coordinate the implementation. And sometimes the coordination has to be international, which raises the game to a whole new level, especially if communication infrastructure is down or diminished. Ultimately, though, once they make that decision, they got to make it make sense to everybody. And we all know that publicly traded corporations, the public wants to know who made the decision, when did they make it, and why did they make it. But ultimately, there is an accounting. Even in government, someone's always going to ask you, what did you do? Where did the resources go? And how did you continue to move forward? And then pretty much the bottom line for all disasters is you got to learn from them. And our whole deal with EarthX, to be quite candid and to quote our president and CEO, we need to learn these lessons before they're real. Because when we have to start learning them in the real world, much like we're doing with COVID, it's going to mean a huge loss of life. And we need to try to do better at this. And we think by offering EarthX for free, we're doing as much as we can to help support that. Just a couple of things on this. If you're the leader for your organization, and I hope we've got some leaders on here, you realize that Monte Carlo piece is a chance to really refine the decision. But those refinements and decisions are very difficult. You got to understand how you make decisions. You got to understand that everybody's watching you make a decision and you need to do it with confidence. Most leaders who fail the confidence test fail the CEO test as well, and they don't last. And then they need to know how to pull a team together and delegate important pieces of information. And the cool thing with EarthX that we've seen over the last 3 years is you can go ahead and feed back to subordinate elements and let them work pieces of the puzzle and then back brief. And you do it in a virtual environment, so nobody gets hurt. But the bottom line is you got to re-examine how you make decisions, and you got to make sure that you're making the one in the best interest of the organization. So just kind of an interesting slide that we put together over time. In EarthX, a number of exercises that I've been part of, they're kind of everybody's going to win environment. If you play the exercise, you won. That's not real. In this warrior's exercise, perfect, you may play it perfectly, but it may still not be good enough. Some decisions take time. Most decisions require a level of expertise that sometimes is not available. To win at EarthX this year, you're going to have to be collaborating and communicating at maybe new levels. Sometimes you're just up against overwhelming odds. I would say Maria is a great example of that. Katrina is another example. When things go very, very bad, you just got to do the best you can. But a couple of things I've learned leading exercises literally across the U.S., you've got to overcome this. There'll be someone in your room or someone on your team that goes, well, that can't happen here. You really need to find that person and get them to understand that the two we're talking about this year can happen anywhere. And then the other group, there's another guy out there that'll always say, well, it's never happened before. Well, I hate to tell you this, but these two have happened before. And again, with cyber, they're happening today. And I kind of hope we never really have to experience a wide scale EMP. But the other thing that you can learn from is some people cannot make those decisions and they become paralyzed. And it's definitely better to learn that up front and use this as kind of the Kobayashi Maru, if you're familiar with Star Trek. You know, it's a no-win situation, but there are some things that you can learn from it to be better on the backside. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of points here. We are chasing everything this year into this idea of building a global continuity framework. And that global continuity framework is going to be built off of a resilience framework that we hope to share with everybody at the end of this year. But to get there, we need everybody's help. So what we're doing is we're standing up an organization called the Resilience Commission. This will be a public-private sector resilience commission. We're going to kick it off this fall with 3 inaugural webinars. They will together build the initial version 1 of the Global Resilience Framework. We think right now, the way things are laying out, that'll be published in January of 2021. It is going to put forward a number of practical resilience objectives. I've been part of a bunch of different resilience groups, and I'll be honest with you, my personal palate, my taste for resilience discussions that talk about 5 and 10-year plans is about over with. So we're going to focus the Global Resilience Framework on tactical objectives that can be accomplished in 12 to 18-month timeframes. That you'll still need the funding, obviously, to make that happen. But there's a number of really great examples that we'll want to share with the world. And you may want to be part of that discussion and pay attention and use some in your own organization. We are going to do it inclusively. It's going to be open to the public. We're not going to do anything behind closed doors. We are bringing in a number of top-notch international speakers in a number of different areas. We pretty well committed that the first one is going to be on critical lifeline infrastructures, obviously electric, water, communications, etc. The second one we're thinking is going to look at health and medical, along with global supply chain issues to build resilience. And the third one is really shaping up right now in our build. Looks like it's going to be leadership, communities, and the global supply chain, along with strategic risk. So we think those 4 things coalesce very nicely into that 4th one. These are not going to be long webinars. They'll be about an hour with opening presentations and then a facilitated group discussion among the presenters. And if you want to be part of that, just register for EarthX and stay in the loop. That's how we don't broadcast to the public. We only talk to people that are interested in what we're putting out. Some of the continuity areas we're taking a look at, you can see there on the left. You've heard me mention supply chain and leadership. Some of the things that we think there's a lot of work that could be done in is this whole idea of alert, notice, and assessment. Again, COVID kind of bit everybody because we didn't have our act together on that piece. We've got to do better. And if you look at the kind of the rolling thunder that cyber presents, we absolutely need to close the gap between communities on what everyone knows. There was a major announcement that happened yesterday with a cyber hack that CISA did a great job getting the webinar material out. But just today, I talked to people in other countries and they have no idea that that's out there. So we've got to do a better job making sure that patches and understanding risk is shared widely. And again, I've mentioned strategic risk a couple of times. Some dates here, we talked about all of them, so I won't spend much time on this slide because we're getting close to our time here. But if you're interested, get those on your calendar or send me an email, or when you get the slides, pull this one slide out, put them on your calendar, make sure to register. All our events are free. Unlike the chamber, though, we have a limit on the number of seats for our webinars, so register early if you get a chance. I'm going to answer a couple of questions because they always come in. People always ask once they've registered. Our second most answered question is this one: how do I get a certificate? So we do offer a certificate of participation. You have to complete the exercise first. Once you're done with phase 3, you will get a link. And if you're the person that registered for your organization, we will ask you to send that link to everybody who participated so that they get the link. You'll fill out the little survey about EarthX and about some things about your organization. Nothing that tells us who you are, just things that you think are important. And then once we get your survey completed, within minutes, you will get a certificate by email. So there's a certificate at the end of the exercise. And I know that's important to some people. They need proof that they're continuing their education. But this next one, this is the most frequently asked question. What time does the exercise start? So if I was in the military again and I was on the podium, I would foot stomp right now. This is a virtual exercise. It is worldwide. It'll actually come online at midnight, 1 September in Australia. And then as it comes around, it'll be available to everybody at that point. It'll be online. It'll be available from 1 September through 31 October. We are going to have a hard stop date this year at the end of October because we want to reconfigure the exercise to make it available in components. And you may be interested in that for future training opportunities. But to do that, we have to take it down. So last year, when we said it was over with, I got kind of bombarded with requests that for people who either didn't hear about it early enough or played it once and wanted to play it several more times with different teams. We did end up leaving it up for a couple of more months. We ended up picking another 400 people that played. We won't do that this year. So if you want to play 1 September through 31 October is your dates, and you pick your own start time and end time. If you want to play it and do it across a number of days, that's totally up to you. We really don't care. We'll know when you logged in. We'll know when you advance. I got a great programming team that manages all that, and they do a super job. So this is my last slide. I think I'm real close on my time. Maybe I'm going to have a little bit left over. Great. So if you have any questions about EarthX at all, that is the email address that can help you out, earthx@eiscouncil.org. I answer that email along with my exercise team. We're pretty responsive. If you send us something, we'll get you an answer within a day or two, normally within a couple of hours, depending on where you are. If you want to know how to register for EarthX, there's the hyperlink for the registration. The kind of cool thing, though, is that after 3 years, if you just go Google EarthX, we will be the first thing that comes up. So if you can't remember the link, just do a Google and we'll come up. It'll take you to the first page with a countdown clock, and then that page, once you click the link, it'll take you right in to do your selection of what lanes you want to play. Kind of my closing comment here is pretty serious about this idea that it's all our responsibility. It's a shared responsibility to be prepared for these events. I know a lot of times we don't have the time to go to a training seminar. We don't have the funds to ask to conduct an exercise on site. And hardly any are really available that are good for individuals and families. We've gone out of our way to have a really great exercise for individuals and families. I'd encourage you to register yourself for that, register your family and your friends, and then push this opportunity into your professional network. You really want everybody in your supply chain or your support chain to take advantages of the same opportunity. Again, it doesn't cost anything. It does take a little time. EarthX is very engaging, and once you get into it, you're really gonna want to push all the way through. But remember, it's your responsibility to help them be prepared. So I've actually concluded a little ahead of time. So I appreciate your attendance. If you have any questions, reach out to me, and we will get you the slides. Zach has promised me that he'd take care of that for me. So Zach, I'll turn it back over to you. I don't know whether we've got any questions. If we do, I'll take them, and if not, we can go ahead and end a few minutes early.